Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. Today is March 27th, and we are looking at the death of an abortion rights poster child. You may have seen her picture before that I put in the thumbnail if you follow abortion rights groups at all. And according to the National Organization for Women website, Clara Bell Duvall was a 32-year-old married mother of 5, ages 6 months to 12 years. She and her family were living with her parents in Pittsburgh due to financial problems. Now says that Clara attempted a self-induced abortion with a knitting needle. And though she was seriously ill and in severe pain, her doctor delayed hospitalizing her for several weeks. Her death at a Catholic hospital on March 27, 1929 was attributed to pneumonia. And I would welcome any accurate information about Clara's death. After all, the National Organization for Women and a lot of other abortion rights organizations continue to claim that Becky Bell died from complications of an illegal abortion when in fact she died of pneumonia concurrent with a miscarriage. There was zero medical evidence that her pregnancy had been tampered with in any way. But if people who think abortion is a good and beautiful thing want to claim Clara Duvall as somebody that their philosophy killed, fine. Your ideology killed this woman. I'll let you take the blame for it. Clara also seems to be the woman described in the chapter Marilyn in The Worst of Times by Patricia Miller. So this story was supposedly told by Marilyn, one of Claudia's children. The pseudonym Claudia was used. But there are way too many coincidences to think these aren't the same women. So Marilyn gives her mother's name as Claudia rather than Clara, and her age is 34. So the difference in age can be attributed to people taking the date of birth and the date of death and just calculating without taking the months into account. Marilyn also said that her mother sang with the Pittsburgh Light Opera Company, so it's possible Marilyn was using a fake name to preserve the family's privacy. So Claudia's association with the opera company may also explain the elegant portrait on all of the pro-choice websites. That is a portrait that a poverty-stricken and desperate woman would have been highly unlikely to be able to afford. Now, the following facts match. 5 children from an infant to a 12-year-old living in Pittsburgh, died in March of 1929, death originally attributed to pneumonia. The woman used a knitting needle. She was at home for several days before being hospitalized, died in the hospital, and the doctor seemed at a loss for how to care for his patient. Now, Marilyn said that her brother Gerald was the oldest, 12 years old. Eileen was 10, Rose was 8, Marilyn was 6, and Constance was 18 months. Hold on, let me fix a typo here. Marilyn describes very poignantly the difference between life before her mother's death and life afterward, and the loss truly was shattering for the entire family. Mother said that her mother had gotten help from a friend for a successful abortion between the births of Marilyn and Constance. Marilyn didn't have any details of the first abortion, and what she got about the fatal abortion was from her sister Eileen, who said that she'd spoken at length with her mother when she was hospitalized. Although it seems kind of dubious that a dying woman would be explaining to a 10-year-old girl how she killed herself doing a knitting needle abortion. So we can look at some of the differences between the stories. Aside from the difference in age and name, which I really discount, the following don't match. Now has the family living with the woman's parents. Marilyn said they were living in a large house owned by the mother's parents. Now indicates that the family, they were just too poor to afford a home of their own. But Marilyn said that they lived in a large house. Her father was editor of one of Pittsburgh's daily newspapers, and he did freelance public relations for sports events. Marilyn said that one of her mother's friends was the wife of a well-known Pittsburgh industrialist, which is not a likely friendship for a destitute woman forced to move her family of 7 into her parents' home. Marilyn also said that her mother was laid to rest in a magnificent mahogany casket with a satin lining, which is hardly the sort of burial a poverty-crushed widower could afford. Marilyn said the casket lay in the parlor, a room that poor people were not likely to have. And in fact, Marilyn described how shocking it was to go live with poor relatives after her mother's death. Poverty was a new experience. And in fact, Marilyn described a riverboat outing the family took before her mother's death and described how the girls were dressed in matching navy blue coats with red satin linings and her brother had a jacket and tie. So let's reconcile these stories. The census data for 1920 indicates that Clara Duvall was the wife of Grafton Duvall. Grafton was a newspaper editor. In 1920, the couple had 2 children, Grafton Jr., age 4, and Eleanor Jane, age 20 months. And the couple and their children lived at 1616 Westfield Avenue, which is the same address as Clara's parents. And often you would have 2 houses with the same address because one of them was on the alley and the other was on the main street. And the Duvall family were still at that address at the time of Clara's death. The December 3rd, 1914 Pittsburgh Post notes, Miss Bell's betrothal. An interesting engagement announced yesterday was that of Miss Clara Jane Bell, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph H. Bell of Aspinwall, to Grafton O. Duvall, son of Dr. and Mrs. Wirt Duvall of Baltimore. Mr. Duvall is a student in the University of Maryland, where he is in the law department. Okay, who is going to put that in the society pages for some destitute slum woman? So Grafton and Clara married in 1950 in Aspinwall when he was 24 and she was 20. Then the January 9th, 1922 Pittsburgh Post-Gazette notices nights for the KDKA radio program that Mrs. Grafton Duvall would sing multiple soprano solos. And in fact, Clara frequently shows up in the society pages as a soloist for various events in the city. So we have 3 possibilities. One is that Clara Bell Duvall and Claudia were 2 different women, each with 5 children, each lived in homes owned by their parents, each performed a knitting needle abortion in the same city in the same month, and both died in hospitals and had their deaths wrongly attributed to pneumonia. I think that's extraordinarily unlikely. So I think we can cross 1 off the list. Number 2, Clara and Claudia are the same women, but the National Organization for Women and other pro-choice organizations turned her from a prosperous matron and opera singer into a wretched slum mother in order to make her situation seem more desperate. And the third possibility is that this story was gotten third hand based on a purported deathbed conversation between a mother and her 10-year-old daughter. This might just reflect a misunderstanding of something that Clara was trying to convey to her little girl. But, you know, if what they described was accurate, Clara's abortion was unusual in that it was self-induced instead of performed by a doctor, as were about 90% of criminal abortions. And it's also kind of weird that somebody who had the kind of money and clout Clara Duvall had would have resorted to a home abortion instead of getting a connection with a doctor. I'm sure a lot of women at this opera company and all these singers that she hung out with would have probably known a reputable abortionist. So the whole story is a little weird, but there you have it. That's the information I have about Clara Duvall's untimely and very tragic death.